Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Straight Up Startups. It is Tuesday, November 8th, and I'm joined, like always, by my friend Nick Hughes. Nick, how we doing today?
Hey Connor, I'm doing real well.
Nice.
Doing real well. Fresh back from a couple days over down south in Mexico, so I'm refreshed and ready to go.
Yeah, you're looking a little tan over there too. I'm
Yeah.
looking at myself. I'm looking awfully ghostly compared to you over there.
It felt good. It felt good. But hey, it's actually nice weather in Seattle, so we're getting a little bit, I guess, that Mexico sun.
Yeah, it's been like I think I saw it's been like 5 days over 60, which hasn't happened in over 100 years here in the month of November. So yeah, it's been really nice. Can't complain about it at all. Perfect. Well, to give you guys a little update or a little rundown about what we got going on today, we're going to be talking about Slack's letter to Microsoft. We're going to be talking about what we think is the most noteworthy or our most trended brand right now. We're talking about Alibaba Singles Day, which is coming up, and some other startup just topics from some different writers. And so let's jump in. First one here comes from the author on Medium. His name was John Wheel. He's the founder and CEO of a company called Group Hub. And he wrote Why My Startup Nearly Failed. And what he does, he goes on to talk about a lot of his struggles that I think, Nick, you and I can relate to a lot. And so, Nick, what's one thing that he mentioned here that you think, that we either should keep talking about or that founders should be aware of if they're looking to start a company?
Yeah, he touches on a number of I would call them founder sins that unfortunately a lot of us commit. What's funny is he's like, and I did this and I knew I shouldn't have done it. And it's really funny because, one of them was he really built a lot of his product without a lot of customer feedback. And he mentions that he did that a lot just from the fact that he was scared of the negative responses that he might get, essentially people telling him that they didn't like this, they didn't like that. His MVP was like quite robust, a lot of features and a lot of what he called pages on the website. So I didn't even visit. I don't know if it was a mobile app or simply just a website, but he really did a lot of work under the hood without gauging from other users. And we all commit to that sin. And, but I think if you're going to take a lesson from that is, I think to paraphrase, create a very lightweight MVP and get customer feedback and do that without investing months and months and possibly even years in your product. And so that's one of the things I picked up. I also never used it, but he didn't clearly articulate the value proposition that he was going for. So the whole time I'm reading it, I'm like, well, sometimes, products that don't have a good marketplace fit, they fail. And that seems like what happened here. Sounds like he's not done yet, so he's reviving it. But those are the things that stuck out to me.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think he does. There are definitely a lot of founder faux pas that are nice to know. The thing that really stuck out to me, and I think you and I both can relate on some of our experience working together, that talking about architecting a product for scale, right? And we hear this a lot in the startup universe because that's what comes from investors, right? When founders and CEOs are meeting and trying to raise money, the question always comes up: well, what's your plan to scale? Right? How are you going to be able to get this out of your city or your little niche into the broader consumer hands? And so founders, I think a lot of times get stuck on having to solve that problem because they get that question thrown at them so much when they're trying to raise money. And so, but I think the problem is, like, if you don't have something that can get off the ground, you should not be thinking about scale at all. And that's something that I'm trying to deal with at one of my companies, right? Like, if we can't get 1,000 people in Seattle to use the product, it does not matter how great the product is or how efficient and well scaled it is. It doesn't matter at all. So you want to be quick, you want to get it out to market so you can get that feedback, you can iterate and evolve. And then if you do have the luck that you're going to get to scale your product nationwide, worldwide, then you're probably going to have the money and some more resources to actually solve those problems and jump into those problems when you have them. But I think a lot of founders, myself included, get caught up in this We got to scale, and how are we going to scale, and making sure we're solving all those problems from the very beginning. But if you don't have a start, then you don't have anything at all.
Yeah. And he expressed that he comes from a technical background, which he eventually, speaks that, he was kind of, it's not as expensive to go deep in fixing your product so it does scale, and understanding that the millions of users are on there, that you're okay. But yeah, first and foremost, get an MVP out, get people using it, identify the value proposition, why they want to use this every day. That is paramount. And it's very important, more and more important than, if our millionth user gets on it, then the thing's going to crash.
Yep.
So huge lessons learned there. And interestingly, we're gonna transition here to the next topic, which is the Slack. Apparently, David just threw a rock at Goliath, and it's crazy that So if people aren't familiar with what's going on, Microsoft just recently announced that they are releasing a Slack competitor, or an internal communications platform. And Slack actually took out an entire page. Was it in the New York Times?
New York Times back page.
Back page, huge. And wrote an entire page, essentially about, a couple, 5-6 paragraphs on welcome to the world, Microsoft. And basically it was like a kind of a bitch slap. And I think it's interesting. We'll get to that. But, we don't have time to read the whole thing. But Connor, maybe sum it up and then give your thoughts on how ballsy you think this move is.
Well, it was really ballsy. And I was really surprised. I feel like Slack this is the first time they've really taken that approach. I've really liked all their marketing campaigns, their commercials. I thought they were doing a really good job scaling. But this was dangerous. We talk about in sports a lot, giving teams locker room material, right? So they can post it up on their walls and remind them every day while they're getting hyped. And if I was working on teams at Microsoft, I would have that New York Times article, to actually buy a newspaper and pin that to my wall and have that be my motivation. Because that's a great piece of content to really make sure you get up and you work hard in the morning. And so I thought it was really dangerous. The main reason being that Microsoft has so many corporate partners, right? And I think this is going to be good for Slack as far as getting some of the exposure to some of these bigger companies that just aren't going to move quickly and implement scale wide using Slack. But all these companies are already using the Microsoft suite, so it's going to integrate very easily, and it's going to reduce email. And if it's all in one place, I think it's really smart. The one thing that I wanted to bring up, which I read about after reading this, was Apple actually did the same thing in 1981 in the Wall Street Journal. And they did it when IBM introduced their first personal computer. And it actually blew up in Apple's face. And when I first read that, I was like, wait, but like Apple is king. But we forget that in the 80s, they started as king and then they almost failed. They more or less did fail. And then they had a resurgence with the iPod, really, that came out. And so they had a very similar article, very well written, that was calling them out, saying good luck, a lot like Slack. And it actually bit them in the ass later. And IBM ended up crushing them with the partnership with Microsoft over the next couple of years. And Apple really didn't back it up. It wasn't for another 20 years where Apple really got back into the fold and it, I guess, eventually beat IBM. So that's my big scare is like you're still a startup. You don't necessarily have all of your ducks in a row revenue-wise. I think they're so well-funded that they're going to be all right and they're here to stay. But I thought it was very dangerous. I don't know if that was really the best play, but it did make for some good controversy. What did you think?
Yeah, it's very ballsy. I agree with you. And a few of those, like some of those points for sure. And are you hearing an echo at all?
It's cutting in and out.
Shoot. Well, I'll continue. So I feel like, Microsoft has a, is it,
Try unplugging the headphones. Just go without headphones.
or is this better now?
A little bit. It might be the internet.
Interesting. All right. Well, I'll just say that Microsoft, it does have an established customer base. When they release things, if it is a quality product, dude, they're going to definitely gain a ton of customers. Slack is still not known outside of the tech industry, and this was part of maybe their way to, in a backhanded kind of bitch slap way, they're going to get attention from a lot of those companies that are not in the tech industry. But I think it's a little early to play these games.
Totally. And you mentioned it being David versus Goliath. I'm not sure if David has a strong enough stone to knock Goliath out. They're definitely not going to knock them out. They're here to stay. I am really interested in seeing how this integrates with their LinkedIn acquisition. But Microsoft, I personally think they're kind of like getting back to being cool again. I really like what Satya has done. And then what they do with Microsoft and the learning platform there, combined with this Teams tool, I think they just have a lot of potential to really like just re-solidify themselves within more the enterprise market, maybe not so much the startups. But the enterprise is where all the money's at, so that's not a bad place to be. But here, talking about enterprise companies, marketing consulting agency called Profit released their second annual brand relevance index. And what it was a poll of 15,000 U.S. consumers of over 300 brands, and they list kind of which one was most powerful. And Apple obviously is number one, and then Amazon's at number two. But GeekWire reported they found it surprising that millennials, which more or less you and me, said that Amazon was number one and not Apple. And so, Nick, what do you think about that piece of information? And also, what brand is most relevant to you? What would you rank number one?
I did find that Amazon being most relevant for millennials, that was interesting. And, first off, they only polled like 15,000 individuals. I don't necessarily think that that's a big enough population chunk for, if you even want to say US, there's 300 million plus people in this country. Just polling 15,000, I'm not necessarily sure, don't even know where they're from, but I thought that was interesting. I do think it's pointing to, consumers are valuing the Prime membership, the on-demand, the delivery, the online shopping and commerce. So that's interesting. But that was a shock to me. I would say that the most valuable brand to me is probably Apple. I have an iPhone. I use it every day. I think Apple does great work. And if you look at those top brands, Android was up there. Interestingly enough, Android and Google were up there. Also Samsung was up there. So clearly we're talking about gadgets and devices that we interact with every day, software and, infrastructure we interact with every day. But notable, Facebook was not in the top 50.
Yes, very notable.
Yeah. So I would say that for me, it's Apple. They are present in my day every single day.
Yeah, that makes sense. My big worry with Apple is every year they are going to be expected to be better and better and better. And I think that's going to be very tough on their company. They really aren't going to have many opportunities to slip. Where Amazon really, even though they've constantly shown growth, they've had plenty of quarters where they did slip and it didn't hurt them too much, pretty much because they have so much going on. But I mean, you got to give a nod here to Google, just because the fact that Android was number 3 and Google was number 5, and they own 2 of the top 5, that is very significant in my mind. We were just talking about Microsoft. Microsoft and Xbox made the list, made the top 50. So I think there's a little bit of relevance there. I'm kind of surprised that Uber's not on there. Maybe they just had a younger demographic who aren't at the point where they're ordering cars from their phone yet. But I know you and I, we use that service quite a bit. And I think they would be up there just for how well known they are.
Right.
I was really surprised.
I think they're very close, man. And given the announcements they made recently, I'm sure they'll be on this list soon. And it'll be interesting to see, as time goes on, where Tesla, Uber, and all those self-driving cars show up in that list.
Definitely. But Amazon's not going anywhere, right? And I heard a prediction actually from This Week in Startups with Jason Calacanis, and he was predicting that Amazon's going to be the first $1 trillion company. And that really got me thinking, and he might have a really good point. And right before we transition, the next topic might be talking about the other company that gets to $1 trillion first. But Amazon is doing something right. And what they have that only Google can really compete with is they have an e-commerce platform, which is just giant. They have a content publishing platform, right, which goes against Netflix, which is one of those other top 5. And then they're also doing all the different hardware stuff. And they have all the AI technology. So they have their hands in a lot of different pots, and they're, for the most part, being pretty successful on a lot of those parts. We'll see what Echo does and how much that increases with some of that artificial intelligence. But the fact that they have e-commerce and content, that's a strong 1-2 punch for any company. And that's I'll let you transition to the next one. That's what the other company doesn't have yet.
Speaking of that other company, Singles Day, which is November 11th. We're talking about Alibaba here. Probably the other company that has possibly could reach $1 trillion market cap, which is insane. But Alibaba's Singles Day is basically a similar concept to Black Friday and/or Cyber Monday. And dude, this is crazy. They did about $16 billion last year on that one day. And this individual who wrote this article is projecting roughly $21 billion in one day. Commerce, just online commerce, a huge shopping day. And it's massive. And what's interesting is we're talking about one site. When you hear the statistics of Black Friday or Cyber Monday, that's all US e-commerce. And this is talking about Alibaba's one site, essentially one company driving all this revenue. I'll throw it to you, Connor. Should we care about what's going on across the world on Alibaba's platform?
So I kind of went back and forth with this. Like, is this significant? Is it not significant? They said they're going to do the night leading up to the midnight launch of Singles Day. They're doing this like telethon with all these celebrities, and they're expected to get 200 million people to watch that live. And I think 195 million of those people are all in China. So part of me goes, wow, like that's really significant. And then the other part of me goes, but China doesn't have the same media distractions that we do, right? Like we have so much more content that we can consume just based off the firewall, and on Netflix and television and DVR and all these other things that we can watch, plus sports, right? The millions of sports that are on every day, to really distract us. So it's really hard to get. Probably the presidential election can't even get 200 million people to watch it. So I think that number's kind of skewed just because of the type of country that China is. But I think we totally should be paying attention to it. That is a crap load of consumers going to buy. And the interesting stat I saw on there was like almost 75% of those transactions are all made on mobile. That is a very significant statistic that indicates where the trend's going, where that market's specifically going, and how quickly they're adopting to that. So I think this is the 7th year they've done it, and to predict they're going to do $21 billion in one day is just mind-blowing. And yeah, when someone puts up a number like that, you have to pay attention. I think, yeah, they're giving Amazon a run for their money. I know Prime Day didn't do that much. So it's pretty interesting, but I think you got to take it with a grain of salt because China just can't compare because there's not as much going on as there is in the US.
Yeah. And look, I think that we have to pay attention. We have to be looking at the way that I know what you said about China, and I know that it's, they have less distraction and whatnot, but man, I think that this is a leading indicator, and I think Amazon and all the other companies need to really pay attention to, dude, they are just creating this energy that it's like a magnet. And we're talking about, like they mentioned, 1 hour, almost $1 billion each hour.
It's a lot of money.
So I think it would be very smart for any U.S. company to pay attention to what happens during the day, how they're facilitating those transactions, and there's probably things that we can pull from it. I think Asia is just in general. I know China, this specific area, is different than Singapore or South Korea, but in general, this is a more mobile, commerce-oriented area of the world, and I think that they're pointing at some things that U.S. companies can take from.
Certainly, and if you're an e-commerce company or you're trying to sell online or get a social media presence, like mark November 11th on your calendar. It's November 10th for us, really late at night. But like there is going to be so much social activity happening on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever platform you're choosing. There's you can take advantage of all this traffic in some type of way. There's so many people going online that day and probably tweeting out about it that if I had some type of online product, I would at least be putting #SinglesDay out there a couple times just to see if I get any sort of traffic. But I think it's kind of a big opportunity for the taking, which I think really makes for a good transition when it comes to taking advantage of opportunity, especially online. Someone who I know you follow, I follow almost religiously now, is Gary Vaynerchuk. And he introduced this week his new project, which is Vayner Talent. And he says the future of personal branding. So for the last 6 months, for those of you who don't follow Gary Vee, I highly suggest it. He's like the hustle guru. He pretty much he made the phrase popular of crushing it, which is very big in startups. And he has a camera crew and a film editor follow him around everywhere he goes. He documents every moment of his professional life. And then a couple days later, the editors go through and they edit it and they release it out as what's called the DailyVee. And it's just a great snapshot into his life and see what he's doing, what he's working on, and how he does hustle. And he does what he says he does. And so for $25,000 a month, he will help execute that for you. He's going to provide you a team. They're going to film. They're going to edit. And he said that he can take any B-list celebrity and make him an A-list celebrity. And so I'm already a believer that he can do it. I mean, I don't doubt him in anything he does anymore. But Nick, what do you think of this? Do you think it has some potential?
I think it does, man. I think he's proven that there is a method to this. Clearly, if you exclude his personality and just the uniqueness he brings to the table, which I think is a lot, outside of that, there's process, there's organization, there's the technology and or the specific aspects of putting this all together is required. And then lastly, the resources. And I think I think that he would bring that. I did, I look at the price. I'm like, okay, initially I'm sitting here thinking like, who's his customer base then? Because if you're able to afford $25K a month, you either already have a growing business or you just have a shit ton of money. But I'm just trying to figure out like, okay, he's saying, if you have the talent and you can make it, we will help you get there. And then he's like, bam, $25,000 a month. And I'm just like, okay. And I would need to learn more to understand exactly what's involved. What are they providing? But that kind of struck me as a little bit much. But I think the general concept of and I'm already down this road. We're creating content, writing, videos, audio. He's pointing to, look, it's about creating a brand for yourself and or your company, but it's the brand distribution. It's the strategy and the PR and the social media and hitting all the touch points. It's all process. and that's what they're providing. So I think he's he's spot on with how to structure once you create the content. How do you get it out? How do you presence? How do you create it each week? I think it's worth something, but I'm not sure at this point. To me, it's worth $25K a month.
Yeah, I think it just depends on who you are, but he just preaches it's all about content, right? And if you're putting out quality content, people are going to come and people are going to listen to you. And if you keep providing free content, you're hoping that eventually when you jab and you punch, that you do get them with that knockout and you get high conversion rates when you need to do it. And so first I was sticker shock too. 25 grand a month, that's a lot. But then I thought about that. All right, that's 300K for the year, right? And he's not targeting someone like you or I. But if I'm a B-list celebrity who does like 1 or 2 movies a year or like a TV show and I'm making, $1 million, right? What a 300K investment could turn into easily $3 million in booked gigs just by your increase in, you go from 1 million Facebook likes to 10 million Facebook likes, or your notoriety. All the content that's going to come out, that's going to catch the eyes of TMZ. It's going to catch the eyes of just viral marketing and what people are doing and saying about you. And so if I was like a B or C list celebrity and I was kind of hustling to book gigs, I think it could be a worthy investment for a year to say, I'm going to put 300K into this machine. And if it books an extra 3 or 4 movies and you get $3 million in contracts, all of a sudden that was very well worth it. And then all that experience you have there kind of adds on to being more and more famous. So I think, yeah, he's definitely going after a certain type of customer. But obviously he's streamlined it because his guy, he calls him D-Rock, follows him around, 24/7. Like that kid just must, he's on a bigger grind than probably any of us or Gary Vee. Because he's got to film all of it, and then he's got to find time later to actually go and edit it. I know he spent a lot of time on planes, so he probably has the time. But that's going to be really tough for those people touring around. But there's going to be some really unique jobs there at Vayner Talent and following some interesting celebrities. And I mean, I really believe him. I think he can do it. I've seen his growth numbers have been really impressive since he started DailyVee, and I think he could help a lot of B-listers.
Yeah, and I've been on this subject for a while now, just thinking like, kind of the directions that, we can take with Founders Live and where I want to go. And I'm just, I'm looking at everything, which is there's free platforms. There's platforms like Snapchat that you can, it's very short clips, but you can start creating content that way. There's, you can hire on videographers like you're mentioning. You can hire on PR specialists, and now the list gets big, and we are talking about tens, 20s, thousands of dollars a month. It's not cheap. And I would just continue to ask in terms of Gary Vee, in this specific, like, who is his specific customer base and niche that he's trying to tackle right now? You might have mentioned them, but I think that there's 10 or 100 times the amount of people in this world that possibly are creating decent or good content that just don't have the means to get it pushed out, get millions of people to actually see it and read it or view it. And his service is too expensive for them. So
totally.
Are they still just back to, well, I guess I'll just use YouTube? I don't know. So it's an interesting concept, but we're going to transitioning here. Interesting article on GeekWire about a day in the life without your phone. And this was actually, they wrote about Taylor Soper, a reporter there at GeekWire, that he, for some reason, his phone stopped working and he had to go throughout an entire day and did not have connectivity, did not have his phone. And it was like a shock. And we're talking about from getting up and knowing what time it is to if you ride the bus to, or, take an Uber, if you don't have One Bus Away app on your phone, you don't know what time the bus is coming, or it's a little more difficult to, you can't get an Uber ride. Your all your emails and contacts and texts are there. So connectivity to your friends, music, Google Maps, a lot of times you don't really know where you're going. like he literally was like, he had nothing. And he said it was a crazy day. So how would you survive if you, for some reason, didn't have your phone?
It would be really difficult. It would be a struggle for sure. And I've had a little bit of experience with that semi-recently in the last couple of months with my cell phone, as I had some real big battery problems with my phone. So it was getting to the times where like I only had 20 minutes of battery all day. And so a lot of times I wasn't using my phone. And it's like, oh, I'll plug my phone in when I'm at home and I'll study up on everything that I know I'm going to, I like bus times or schedules or whatever it is. I need my calendar, and either I'll write it down or, just remember it until I get there. And yeah, he talks about even 10, 15 years ago, like how did people operate, right? The lifestyle has changed so much in a decade because we have so much dependence on this device. And it just makes everything more efficient. It's not like you can't accomplish all those things. It's just the timeliness of accomplishing those things gets stretched out a lot, right? Like one bus away buys me 5 extra minutes to sit in the coffee shop and surf the internet or work or do whatever because I know exactly when the bus is getting there. Or else I've had plenty of experiences riding the bus where even one bus away is wrong and you wait 10 minutes. But those kind of waiting moments really adds up in the course of a day. And if you're traveling a lot, can really slow you down. So I don't think it would really like hurt me all that much. It would just make me a lot less efficient. But that'd be scary. I thinking about this, I think that someone, I mean, maybe it's me, should do like an international day without a phone. I think like you have to put the right cause behind it, but I think that could be a really big like viral opportunity where people around the world like, oh, Monday's International No Phone Day, and I won't have my phone. Like I'm going to participate to raise awareness about, testicular cancer because our phones are right there, or spine issues or whatever it is. I think if you found a good cause, that a lot of people would get behind that, and it could make a really interesting viral event.
Yeah, I would feel the same way as you and as Taylor, man. And it is crazy how much has changed in the last 10, 15 years. Everything that he dealt with, we would all deal with it. I think we're taking for granted how much we use our devices every day for knowledge, for transportation, for just calendar. Man, dude, like what? Did I have an event today, or was I supposed to have that meeting? So it's absolutely 100% a part of our life. There's no going back. And man, for some reason, if you don't have it, you do feel left out and you feel disconnected. And that is an absolute sign of the times. It's kind of scary. I think it's interesting, but it just shows where we're at. And I guess I'll ask one last question before we're moving on here. Would you have any quick thoughts on, like, I hate to use the word any hacks if you don't have your phone, but I mean, it is clearly back to the old times, but if you were to not have your phone for a day, like how would you get around? How would you, any secrets that you would maybe throw out?
The bus is the schedule that I live on, right? Because I ride the bus so many times every day, and all that stuff is posted. It's almost never accurate. But I know Tim Ferriss always talks about the concept of like one day a quarter, or a weekend a quarter, living on short means, meaning like food, like just doing beans and rice, wearing the same pair of jeans, wearing the same t-shirt, and living a really simplistic lifestyle. So it teaches you that when times are hard, or you have less things, you can actually make it through. And it's that resilience that you learn after those 2 days of, oh, my life actually wasn't that bad because I wore the same pair of pants every day. Or that I couldn't go eat sushi, or, and spend all this money. And so I think the same could be true with the cell phone, right? Just trying to have some mindfulness of the dependence that you have on that thing and trying to separate a little bit from it. For me, trying to separate a little bit was I got a smartwatch. Now that I have a smartwatch, which is just totally lame, but now I'm not as afraid to leave my phone, on the couch while I go to my bedroom, because I know if it rings, if I get a message, something that's important, it's going to show up right here. And so it's kind of a weaning off the dependency, but it's just, finding the new drug of choice instead of actually getting off of it.
Yeah.
What about you? You have any hacks?
The only thing I could say is embrace it, and just like totally embrace the slowerness of your day, the possible less distraction, be it on a little more Zen mode, if you will. That's probably the best thing to do. Cause let's just say it was stolen or it's broke and it's going to be 12 to 24 hours before you get another phone. What are you going to do? Just embrace it and have a good time.
Definitely. Well, I'm going to think about, and I might talk to you a little bit more about this International Day Without a Phone, because I think it's got a lot of potential. Not necessarily like as a business, but just like as a really cool social movement. I think there's a lot. I think a lot of people would dig it if they had enough time to prepare to go without the phone.
I like the idea.
But cool. Let's jump to the next topic. It's from a VC. His name is Bryce Roberts, and he wrote an article said, "You don't need a master plan. You just need to start." And now startups are overdosing on ambition these days. And what he talks about is he was at a VC conference, and 4 companies, dropped the word trillion, right? And no startup really should be dropping the word trillion, because we barely can say trillion with the possibility that Amazon and Alibaba get there, because that's still just, years and years away that anyone gets there. And so Nick, kind of, what did you take from this article, just with him focusing on millions instead of billions?
I think he's got a really good point. I think that clearly, because of the VC industry, which historically is, let's call it 40 years old, but really in the last 20 to 25 years has taken hold, and they're looking for returns. And so they put more pressure on when a founder is building a company and putting their projections together, they're influencing how founders think about how they're initially pitching. And what has happened is this end result is that you have these founders saying, we're going to literally go to Mars. And by the way, that's awesome. I'm not torching that at all, but there's a very, very few companies and people that can actually do that, and Elon's one of them. But what seems to be happening is, without fully grasping what they're actually saying and how difficult it's going to be, founders are projecting such large outcomes without building the first version, which we just talked about, right? So I think his point is this: get going. And when you think about Microsoft, the early days, they were just trying to build a simple business. Gates knew the future, and as that thing started to chug along and grow, he started to see more of the future. But the compute on every desk did not come out of his mouth in the first couple of years. That wasn't his vision. And I think when you look at a lot of, there are iconic companies in the world, but then there's a lot of other companies. And what he's saying here is be more realistic on how to start. And going back to what we talked about before, is find an MVP that customers are willing to use as solving their problem, and have faith in that the vision can and should evolve from as you grow as a business. So your slide deck before raising any seed amount of money, possibly or most likely, is not going to be the end vision of your company. So don't get lost in the clouds when all you need to do is take the first step or two. I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I hope that founders read this and it's a nice reality check, because some of these pipe dreams, I think, is what given the concept of startup and entrepreneurship the bad name, which is starting just to go down that direction. Because I've heard it. I've had people who are my superiors go, Connor, you're talking about $1 million companies. We're trying to build $1 billion companies. And I've had people say that to me, and that's just like, what are you talking about? Like, we got to get to the million before we get to the billion. And having that sense, I think, is extremely, extremely important. And in our ecosystem right now, it's just not there, right? Everyone's trying to be Uber. Everyone's trying to grow like Amazon, and accomplish these billion-dollar dreams, which to have a fulfilled, successful life and business, like you don't even need to be making $1 million a day, really, or a year.
Dude, here's the crazy thing is if you follow Cal Canis very much, he's talked about this where when Uber was pitching it was their seed, it was the black car service. And he wasn't, look, he probably had a glimpse of where they were going to go, but there is stories of very reputable angel investors passing on Uber because they're like, yeah, black car service. I don't know. No.
Yeah. Too classy, too upscale.
Yeah. And given what that tells me that Travis was not pitching what Uber is now. And so you can look at, and he actually was just like, look, we're going to create this thing. There is a desire for it. And they were catering tour. If you push a button, a black car shows up, you actually look cool and you get somewhere and it's convenient and that's it. And it took years for them to they actually saw what Lyft was doing and then they followed Lyft and then Uber became the major platform. But I think that that's a leading indicator of they were just looking to get something off the ground, get it used. Yeah. There was a need there. And I think you're right. And, we encounter these people almost every day and there's nothing wrong with having a vision and understanding that there's a huge possibility. But I think the problem is getting too lost. I guess what I say is focused on the horizon and not seeing that there's something in the road. You're like looking 10 miles in the horizon and not realizing that there's something that's crossing the road. You're going to slam into it. And that's a problem. And I really hope that other founders start to understand that it is absolutely okay to pitch a valid company that can create millions of dollars a year in revenue, that solves a problem in people's lives. And you know what's great is the moment you get there, you'll have resources to go to the next level.
Exactly.
And so on that note, this ties perfectly into it, which
very good transition.
That's our goal here. Another interesting article that was written by an individual from Cranium, the company. I'm not exactly sure what they do, but he talks about how to accurately measure the market size of your startup. Is it $1 billion? Is it $1 trillion? And his issue here is that he's like, look, people are taking an industry market size and saying, that's my market. When in reality, he goes through the process of identifying like a SaaS product that was in, for instance, the hair and style, essentially beauty studios or whatever. And it's like, look, your market, we're talking about a total addressable market. So TAM. And that is different than an entire market size for beauty and style. And if beauty and style is like 50 or $100 billion entire market, but what is the percentage that will actually use your product? If it's a SaaS or a CRM platform, we're just talking about software here and the amount that they'll spend every month. And so Connor, reading this article and having some ideas of, the familiarity of what you've done in the past, or at least the companies, what is the best way to establish the market size? Is it top down? Is it bottom up? What sort of methods do you find make sense?
Well, before I kind of get into my opinions, I can't believe people still like severely mess this up. Like I feel maybe that's just because we're in the industry, but there are still people who go and present who say $1 trillion markets, right? And put these audacious numbers out there that are just unrealistic. And it just blows my mind to hear stories that VCs investors are still coming out saying this is what people say is their TAM, and it's crazy. And for your business, there's no one right answer. But what I think everyone should do is look at it from all the different approaches, right? And then try to find a sweet spot in between all the different ways so that you do have multiple exits when you're in a discussion with an investor about how you got to that number. And so to give a quick little rundown, Top down is saying like, here's the total market of salons, right? And then finding your little niche there. Bottoms up would be like, we have 4 different market segments. This is what we're doing now, and how can we build them and grow so they all add up to one. To me, I don't like top down, because that's just like pipe dreams, right? Most big businesses like that are like game changers, and they create their own market for themselves, right? So that TAM is going to be a little bit different than what anyone else is doing there. So I like the bottoms up, and trying to base your numbers off something that is real, that exists, of some revenue that you've already at least sampled and got an understanding. And I think as the next 5 years goes on, having these billion-dollar valuations with no revenue models are going to become a lot more rare, because just the industry and the financing is going to be dried up. But kind of what is practical for the revenue and different modes of revenue that you're going to generate, and then how can you scale those up to get to your actual TAM? But what do you think? You're actually a lot more experienced with this than I am.
Yeah, on the surface, I would agree with you that bottoms up is more unique and specific to the company, which basically means just to kind of touch on what you said. Company identifies, here's our product or service, here's the amount that a customer would pay for it, whether it's monthly or yearly. Here's how many we estimate to reach in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And now you can start doing math, and it's math that's more accurate based on X amount of customers, X amount of revenue, monthly or yearly. And that's accurate to the company. The top down is, it's like, here's, health and beauty, $500 million market. And by the way, there's founders that stop there. Yeah. And they're like, we're in a $500 billion market. And it's just like, you shake your head. So the fact though, is then you would segment into specific, is that health, fitness, is that spa, is that beauty? You go down into that. And then again, the accurate way to do this calculation is you're almost dividing and subtracting based on certain aspects of who would, out of that market, what is the specific product, who would buy that, what percentage, and you slide into a certain dollar amount. I would say that bottoms up is better, because you're pricing your thing, you're determining how many you can possibly reach. But I think the end result of this article, what I took from it, which it confirms what I've believed before, which is there's no right way, and you combine the two to get a kind of neighborhood, or like, here's the spectrum. Is, we find that we are in a market that our TAM, our total addressable market, lands between 150 million and 300 million. And then you go through your thinking, and that's the end result of what an investor is looking for. Is they want to know how you reach that number. They want to know how you're thinking to get to that projection. Yeah. It's not just you took 5 minutes, grabbed a number from a Google search and pasted it into your slide deck. That doesn't work. And, so I think these are practices that founders need to go through to fully understand what is the possibility of this. And then also what is the outcomes that, and again, I think also another lesson here is that in the end, if you do it accurately and that investor says no, it's just because it wasn't the right time. They're not interested in that product or market, but you have taken exercise to understand what the possibilities are in your business. And so you shouldn't be making up numbers to please them. You should create the accurate numbers. And if an investor chooses to invest, they do.
Yeah, I really like what you said there to end that off. And so one more question. Do you think investors ask this? Obviously, they want to know, what can this be and what can it scale to? But do you think they ask that question more to understand the size and the scale and the potential, or really just to understand the way that the founder goes about explaining it in their mental process?
It's absolutely the second. The reason why is because it doesn't take that long for that investor to actually research their own. Yes. Do your own research, take an hour or two. You'll find more or less what the addressable market is for pretty much any industry. And you better know that they're going to do that same, they're going to do that. And so if you aren't accurate and you can't describe your thinking in an intelligent way, or at least in a way that makes sense and you feel comfortable with, they're going to do their own research and then just basically like not get back to you because they realize that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, so exactly. Yeah, so they're looking at what the founders, how they're thinking, what they're thinking, how they're getting to those numbers, and they really grasp the industry they're in and where they're going. And trust me, it's not. Look, this is not easy. We're not making light of it. This is an exercise that all founders, whether it's a CEO, CTO, or small group of founders, they all have to go through this process and really learn where they're going and what the potential is and who their customer is, and the chunk of the pie that they're going to carve out.
Totally. And I think, yeah, that's a great lesson for founders. Yes, it's just a checkpoint, right? Something that you have to check off when you're doing your preparation to meet with founders, but it's not so much. Obviously, that number is important, but explaining yourself and showing the logic about how you got there seems to be the most important part in proving to that investor that you're worthy investment. But sweet, but that is all we have this week in Straight Up Startups. We got some new artwork going. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next Tuesday, like always. Nick, you got anything going on this week? Any announcements? Anything cool that anyone should know about?
All I'll say is if you're in Seattle, you got to go and check out the Seattle Startup Week. If you're not in Seattle, I would search your city Startup Week, and it might have already happened or it might be coming up. But Seattle Startup Week is going to be great. We will be holding Feature Friday at the end of that week. It's going to be off the hook. It's going to be great. So get out there. What's that?
What week is that?
It's next week.
Next week.
So it's November 14th through the 18th.
Sweet. 14th through the 18th. We'll definitely make sure to highlight that next week. Nick, people want to find you online. Where should they find you?
On Twitter, Janick Hughes. I'm on LinkedIn. You can go to founderslive.com and definitely say hi to me there too.
Great. Well, I'm Connor Kaysen. You can find me at my newest venture. I got another sign for that. FindMeInSeattle.com. If you want to find cool spots in the city. Right now, follow me on Snapchat. I got a newsletter coming out. Find me in Seattle. You'll get some cool spots, new way to consume some information. But thank you very much, as always, Nick, and we'll catch you next week.
Peace.
See ya.